Mhm. You have a good team this year. The Nets, I hope. That's our yearly goal.
You have not.
Very few seats remain. The students from Belen can feel free to sit in the stairwells on the wings. And as always, we encourage them to give up their seats to the adults who may be in the area. Thank you. Before we begin, we would like to ask for your support in a special surprise that we have for Mrs. Kor at the conclusion of our presentation. She will be celebrating her birthday on January 31st, and we will have a birthday cake for her and some gifts of appreciation that we'd like to share with her. We hope you can join us in singing happy birthday. Thank you.
You're not going out there until I introduce you, okay?
Students, parents, alumni, friends of Belen Jesuit, on behalf of our principal, Dr. Reyes Garcia, and the administration, we welcome you to this very special presentation by our honored guest, Mrs. Eva Kor. My name is Tommy de Quesada, and I'm the Director of Development here at Belen Jesuit. Our school president, Guillermo Garcia Tuñón, would be delivering this welcome if it were not for him having been called out of the country by the Jesuit Provincial to a meeting of all the presidents. He asked that his best wishes be sent to each of you and prays for a spiritually rewarding meeting with Mrs. Kor tonight. With deep appreciation, Father Garcia Tuñón and the Belen Jesuit community would like to acknowledge the generosity of Mike and Constance Fernandez, who not only arranged for Eva Kor to visit Belen Jesuit this evening, but were also inspired by her incredible story. Mr. Fernandez also donated 500 copies of her book for our students to read. Thank you, Mike Fernandez, so much for your support of Belen. Tonight, two powerful forces joined together that are meant to teach and transform each and every one of us. St. Ignatius of Loyola directed us to find God in all things. We are here this evening to find God first, and Eva Kor's story as an Auschwitz survivor that led to the grace of her forgiving her tormentors, and also Pope Francis's declaration of the Jubilee Year of Mercy. In Pope Francis's book, The Name of God is Mercy, published this month, the Holy Father recognizes how painfully difficult it can be to forgive, but reminds us how the act can soothe a troubled soul.
On the 40th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, a handful of survivors of this monument to Nazi evil returned. Eva Kor, with her twin sister Miriam, found a record of their past. Eva and Miriam were 9 years old and in the front row when the Soviet soldiers liberated this death factory years ago. And they found among a few thousand survivors a large group of twins. Twins who underwent inhuman medical experiments at the hands of Dr. Joseph Mengele, the camp surgeon at Auschwitz, who was known as the Angel of Death.
Just to be free from the Nazis, that did not remove the pain they have inflicted upon me. There might be another way that survivors can heal themselves. I have found one way. Forgive your worst enemy. It will heal your soul and it will set you free. I, Eva Moses Kor, a twin who survived as a child Joseph Mengele's experiment at Auschwitz 50 years ago, hereby give amnesty to all Nazis who participated directly or indirectly in the murder of my family and millions of others.
In a few moments, we will hear from Mrs. Kor, but first, an introduction of our moderator. Mr. David Lawrence is the former publisher of the Miami Herald, during which time the newspaper was awarded 5 Pulitzer Prizes. Since then, Mr. Lawrence has been an advocate of early childhood development as the founding chairman of the Children's Movement of Florida, a member of the Governor's Children and Youth Cabinet, member of the Board of Trustees at Florida A&M University. He has been awarded 13 honorary doctoral degrees and was inducted into the Florida Newspaper Hall of Fame. Additionally, David Lawrence Jr. K-8 Center in Miami is named in his honor. It is my honor and my pleasure to introduce Mr. David Lawrence.
Ladies and you're taller than I am. Much. Ladies and gentlemen, there is goodness and every potential of greatness within each of us. How we live up to that requires defining moments. Moments that are always, almost always in any event, under stress and pressure. Sometimes under conditions most of us could not really imagine. With us this evening is a once little girl who grew up in Eastern Europe. She was born the year after Hitler came to power. In a family somewhat unaware for a few years of the evil he would bring to them and to millions of others. Here on the screen is her family. Mother and father. Alexander, a successful farmer and landowner. Jaffa, a homemaker. 2 older sisters, the kind Edith and the artistic Elise, and Eva's twin, Miriam. Eva Moses grew up on a dirt road, no electricity, no plumbing, no telephone. As a member of the only Jewish family in a small village with just one church, just one tavern, and just one room, school. Her earliest years are full of love and learning, accompanied by a strictness of a father's toughness that ultimately would give her the grit to survive the later horrors of her life. In 1940, Eva turned 6, That same year, Hungarian fascists aligned with the Nazis took control of the region in Romania where the family lived. And everything changed. In school, for instance, the math problems included such as if you had 5 Jews and you killed 3 Jews, how many would be left? In the years to come, the family was placed under house arrest. And then in March 1944, the Mozes family was forced into a ghetto. And 2 months later, they were taken by cattle car to Auschwitz, where ultimately more than 1 million Jews were exterminated. 1944 furnished the cruelest of ironies. Within days of Eva's arrival at Auschwitz, the Normandy invasion occurred. The Allies were winning everywhere. Within a year, the war in Europe would be over and Hitler himself dead by suicide. So by that year, Hitler had to know the war was lost. And yet, with pure evil, he saw that hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were still alive. And so he ordered the architects of the final solution for children, opened a Holocaust museum focused on the twins subjected to the horrors of Dr. Mengele. And then, in the mid-90s, decided in a very personal way to forgive those who had committed evil upon her, including that doctor. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. Preceded by details of her life and what she endured. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a splendid example of someone from whom we can all learn, Eva Moses Kor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's kind of nice, isn't it?
Very nice, very nice.
I'm going to ask Mrs. Kor a few questions. And we're going to do that for a while. And then we're going to leave some time for your questions.
Can I interrupt for a moment?
You're in charge.
I just want to introduce myself. All that is beautiful, but it doesn't relate to you, my spirit. So I'm going to introduce myself the way I introduce myself at all my lectures. My name is Eva Kor. I am a survivor of Auschwitz, a survivor of medical experiments conducted by Dr. Mengele, and now that I'm almost 82 years old, I am trying to survive old age.
I promise you that Eva Kor is going to prevail this evening. So I'll ask a few questions, and then 200 students have read the book and written out questions, and the school has selected several of them, so we're going to leave time for student questions as well. I'm going to begin with this question. Eva, your early years were in some ways very beautiful and loving. But then the evils of Hitler arrived. So give us a sense, please, of those early years, and then how you came to be at Auschwitz, the years between age 6 and 10.
I don't remember much until my father told me at age 5.5 that I should have been a boy. And from there, my trouble with my father started. But life at home was beautiful. My mother always made everything perfect, and with the 4 girls liked to play, and it was a peaceful place, but the outside world immediately changed. And from the first day in school, I was called a dirty Jew, which really was strange because Miriam and I were a lot cleaner than the other kids. And then, of course, they had the power to do whatever they wanted, and they beat us up. And when we went to complain to the teacher, she punished us for being Jewish. So we very fast learned that we had no place to go. At home, my mother hugged us and kissed us and cried with us and said, "I'm sorry, children, but I cannot help you. You have to learn. We are Jews." I guess Jews in Europe in the 1940s tried to not rock the boat and somehow survive, and that was a way to survive. And my father very strictly told us that we are supposed to be the best students in school, and we were. I always loved school. Even today, I love school. And then he said, when you come home, we have a big farm. There is a lot of work. And everybody has to help. And of course, we were glad to help. And then at night, he told us, when you go to sleep, before you go to sleep, you say your prayers. Don't worry. Everything will be okay. God is going to help us. And of course, I believed it. But strange things were happening. Every few months, about 5 or 6 months, a new law, a new rule was passed against us that made our life more and more difficult. And in 1942, there were 2 new laws. We could not hire anybody who was not Jewish. It was an all-Christian village, so we couldn't hire anybody. And we could not travel without a permit. My mother got sick. She tried to draft us, the 4 little girls, into doing the many chores on an old-fashioned big farm, but we weren't very successful. My father asked for a permit to travel to the big city to get a Jewish lady to come and help. That didn't happen. So suddenly here I am, 8 years old. Parents and teachers, I want you to know that children, in my opinion, children from age 6 to 13 are a lot smarter than you think that they are. After 13, all the hormones kick in, and I have no idea what happens to all these smart kids. But I will explain to you why. Children at that age function by instinct, and I could tell in every ounce of my being that we were in great danger, and we had great trouble. So I said to my father, "Daddy, its time has come to escape to Romania," which was only 1 hour by foot from our house. My father said, "You're just a little girl. You don't understand the big important things in our life." And he said, "We have a nice home, and the Germans won't come to this tiny village to pick up 6 Jews." Daddy, I am eternally sorry that you were 100% wrong, and I, as a little 8-year-old kid, was 100% right. We were taken in the spring of 1944 to a ghetto for a couple of months, then loaded onto a cattle car for a 4-day journey till unknown destination. They told us we were going to Hungary, and as the train would stop to refuel, we would ask the guard that was stationed by our cattle car for water. The 3rd day of the trip, we asked for water, and the answer came back in German. I instantly understood what happened, and so did everybody else in our cattle car. We have been lied to. We were not going to Hungary to a labor camp, but we are being taken to Germany to be murdered. 8 hours later, the train stopped again. We again asked for water, and this time there was no answer in any language. But we heard a lot of Germans yelling orders outside. The cattle car doors opened, and thousands of people poured out. And I was standing there on that little strip of land, and that it's forever engraved in my memory. Within 10 minutes, as I looked around trying to figure out what is this place, my father and my 2 older sisters disappeared in the crowd. We were holding on to Mother for dear life, and the Nazis noticed us and asked my mother if we were twins. And my mother asked, "Is that good?" And the Nazi said yes. And she was pulled to the right, we were pulled to the left. And all that took 30 minutes. And Miriam and I no longer had a family. We were all alone, and we had no idea what would become of us.
So what was Dr. Mengele like? What was life like in the 10 months in the camp?
Well, I will tell you from the very beginning, when I saw him, he looked very good looking. Years later, when I was a young girl in Romania, and then mostly in Israel, he looked like Tyrone Power, like a movie star. He was very proper, very correct. The only time I heard him yell, actually, when he found a dead child in the bed. And at the time, I was puzzled because within the first 2 weeks, we knew that he probably murdered our families. What was he yelling if a child died? But in this case, I understood it years later, he lost one of his guinea pigs, because those children who died in their beds, they were not supposed to die. They died as a result of the conditions in the camp. Those who died in the experiments died usually in some lab. And I would say I remember above our bunk bed, because we had 3-story high bunk beds, there were 2 older girls, probably age 15 and 16, and they were tall. And I remember they had blue Angora sweaters, and they would talk among them, "Isn't Mengele gorgeous?" Many of the children did like Mengele. And I wanted to understand. I was very angry. I was not a very happy victim in Auschwitz. But our families were completely gone. He was the only person who could keep us alive. It was the strangest human relationship that anybody can have. We knew that as long as he wanted us alive, we would be alive. And at the same time, he was probably guilty for murdering our families.
But you both had to stay alive. If one twin died, what happened to the other twin?
Well, see, the one little detail that's important. If one twin died as a result of the experiment that he was trying to perform, then the other twin was killed. And those twins who died in the experiment did not die in the barrack. Those who happened to die in the barrack were dying because of the conditions in the camp, starvation, or some disease that they were not injected with.
So your sister Miriam died 20 plus years ago, way before
23 years ago.
Way before one would have thought she would have died. But what happened in the camp clearly led to that.
Absolutely,
Talk about that, if you would.
absolutely. Even though we don't have the data, what happened with Miriam, when she became pregnant with her first child, she developed severe kidney infections that did not respond to antibiotic. With the second pregnancy, things got worse, and this time the doctor studied her and they found out that Miriam's kidneys never grew larger than the size of a 10-year-old child. What I understand without having the information, that would I have died, and that comes from the Auschwitz Museum, Miriam would have been killed, and then they would have done the comparative autopsies. When I didn't die and spoiled the experiment, Mengele used Miriam in another experiment. So she was injected with something that stunted the growth of her kidneys, that ultimately, in 1987, and her kidneys failed, I donated my left kidney, and almost 6 years later, the anti-rejection medication that somehow developed into cancerous polyps, even though 2,000 other survivors of kidney transplant never developed cancerous polyps. Miriam was the only one. And she died, the cancer metastasized everywhere, and she died.
So a great many Holocaust survivors, for reasons that I can understand, don't want to talk about what they went through. But you, going back since 1978, have spoken literally thousands of times about what you've endured. And so it leads me to wonder, why did you decide to speak up, and what are the lessons of your life? And with so many young people here tonight, what would be your advice to young people who face challenges in their own lives?
Okay, there are lots of questions in here. Number one, I'll try to remember them. The number one reason that I began to speak up was because I had tremendous difficulties in the United States dealing with the pranks of Halloween. They reminded me of the harassment just before we were taken away. And when I asked my father to go outside and stop the kids from harassing us, he said there was nothing he could do, that we were Jews and we had to take it. Well, the Halloween prank started and I knew nothing about Halloween. And I went out and chased the kids away. I became very popular. And it lasted 11 nightmarish years. They even painted swastikas on our home and told us, "Go home, you dirty Jew." And in many ways, I even at one time thought about leaving United States and going back to Israel, but I ultimately decided to stay and somehow figure out how to work that way through that. I had only one hope, that if they would know my story, that they would leave me alone. And that was the reason that I tried to find a way to tell my story. And so first big lecture I gave was in 1978. And actually, I still feel sorry for the kids who asked me to come at junior high school in Brazil, Indiana. I spoke for 3 hours. And I have no idea what I said. But they stayed. And from there on, I haven't stopped.
What advice would you have for young people who face problems and
Well,
challenges and pain?
at the end of my irregular lecture, which this is not irregular, this is a very unique lecture, I tell kids that I talk a lot because I want them to learn some of the lessons that I have learned in my life. Number one, never ever give up on yourself or on your dreams. Because if you give up on your dreams, nothing will happen. And the fact is that I did not know how to survive Auschwitz. I tried different things, and here I am, 71 years later, very happy to be alive.
So as I look at your young faces, and there are lots of young faces here, I know, I remember, growing up is very hard. And it's very hard, even if you live in United States, even if you live in Miami and go to this fine school, even then, every single one of you wonders, how on earth will I fit into this big, big mixed up world? Will I be able to accomplish in life what I set out to do? I will just repeat it. If you give up, nothing will happen. On the other hand, I guarantee to you that if you keep trying, it is amazing what our wonderful minds can come up with, and it will work. Life lesson number 2. Prejudice was one of the reasons that Hitler was successful in rising to power. Prejudice is still with us today. And it's rampant. Prejudice always hurts the victims, but it also destroys societies that permit it. So we always have to learn to treat our fellow human beings with respect, try to get to know them, and judge them on the content of their character. Life lesson number 3. Never did I think that I would forgive the Nazis. If anybody would have asked me 23 years ago today if I was going to forgive the Nazis, I would have told you, please find a really good psychiatrist, because they might need some help. I was a good victim. And do you know what it means to be a good victim? I was very angry with the world. And nothing happened until Miriam died. It was maybe a month after her death, unrelated to her death, I received a telephone call from Boston College, another Jesuit, that's a Jesuit college, because I know it is. And some of you might want to go there, I don't know. But the professor, John Michalczyk, said to me, Eva Kor, I have heard you speak about Nazi medicine. I'm doing a conference. And would you please come and lecture to some doctors? And by the way, he said, if you do agree to come, it would be really nice to bring with you a Nazi doctor. Stunned at such a request, I blurted out, where exactly do you think I can find one of those guys? Last time I looked, they weren't advertising in the yellow pages. So he said to me, think about it. And when I remembered that in 1992, we finished a documentary about the Mengele twins with the German television, there was this Nazi doctor. And why it was important to mention that it was after Miriam died, because I needed his telephone number. They wouldn't give it to me in 1992. I faxed them a letter and asked them to give me his telephone number in the memory of Miriam, who just died. And that is the way I got in contact with Dr. Munch, invited him to Boston. He did not want to go to Boston, but was willing to meet with me at his house. I was very scared about meeting this Nazi doctor. But I was also curious. Maybe finally I will learn more details about our experiments. And why is that Nazi willing to meet with me? Unfortunately, he knew nothing about our experiments, but he gave me a good interview for the Boston conference. And then out of the blues, I asked him, it was really a pretty natural question to ask. That's the first time I ever met with a Nazi after we were liberated. I said, Dr. Munch, you were in Auschwitz, and there were gas chambers in Auschwitz. By any chance, did you ever go into any of them? or do you have any idea of how they worked? And he immediately said, this is my problem. This is a nightmare that I live with every single day of my life. And he went on describing the operation of the gas chamber. He also told me that at the end, because he was watching from outside 3 people, people would climb on top of each other trying to get away from the gas that was rising from the floor. And when the people on the top of the pile stopped moving, he knew that everybody was dead, and he would sign one death certificate. No names, just a number of people. Can you imagine? The Nazis were so crazy that they wanted to document with a document signed by a doctor or a Nazi officer how many people died. I thought that was important information, and I asked him to go with me to Auschwitz in 1995, and he immediately said that he would love to. I got back to Terre Haute, and again, a very strange thing. I have no idea how I felt so compelled to thank this Nazi doctor for his willingness to document the gas chamber, but I was. And after searching, brainstorming for over 10 months, a simple idea popped into my head. How about a letter of forgiveness from me to Dr. Munch? I immediately knew that he would like it. But what I discovered for myself was life-changing. I discovered that I had the power to forgive. No one could give it to me, no one could take it away. It was all mine to use it in any way. Up to that time in my life, I did not know I had any power over my life. I was just reacting to what people were doing to me. So I began writing my letter. It took me another 4 months. And then I asked my former English professor to correct my spelling because, sorry, my English spelling is very bad. I don't know how is Mike Fernandez. I hope his is better than mine. But I know that there is a problem for us naturalized citizens. English is beautiful and very difficult. So my English professor corrected my spelling, and then she said to me, Eva, when you go home today, you really need to figure out how to forgive Mengele, or at least, because your problem is not with Munch, it is with Mengele. And you should pretend that you are talking to him and telling him that you forgive him. And I tried it. I closed the bedroom door, wrote them some nasty words I found in the dictionary. I read them, and then I said, in spite of all that, I forgive you. And it really made me feel good that I had some power even over Joseph Mengele, the angel of death. And that is the way we arrived in Auschwitz. And I can tell you, just because we need to kind of shorten my story, that anger, look around in the world. No person who is happy ever wants to start a war. So always angry people start wars. Therefore, I call anger a seed for war. People who forgive are at peace with themselves and the world. And therefore, I call forgiveness a seed for peace. Only one more thing that I would like to leave you with. I have found out 3 or 4 days ago that the genocide in Darfur is still going on, and I really made me feel terrible. I thought that genocide was over. Well, al-Bashir is still trying to kill as many people as he can, and one of his helpers is the Chinese government that is providing the armament and weapons, buying oil from Darfur. Well, here I live in this world. Can I just go to sleep at night and pretend I don't know it? What can I do? And I am thinking every day when I have a few minutes, what can I do? But I have only one mind. So I'm going to give you a home assignment. Whenever you have a few moments and wonder about the world and wonder if you can make a difference, please help me think about it, because every single one of you might have the idea of how we can help the victims in Darfur to stop Bashir. We could just write, I have an idea, if we could write a flood of letters, 1 million letters, and send it to the Chinese embassy or to China, to the Chinese leaders. A cartoon that I have in my mind. They are digging through these letters because governments, like communist governments, they never let any letter go by without censorship. So they are digging because no letter can, so tremendously keeping them busy reading our letters and not doing mischief.
So, Eva, you also forgave your parents.
Yes.
Why'd you need to forgive them?
Well, first of all, my father was definitely not one of those loving parents that I would think about when I compare notes with Miriam. And I said, what do you remember about Daddy? Oh, Daddy was a wonderful guy. Did we have the same daddy? She said that he would put me on his lap and tell me stories about visiting Palestine. I said, Miriam, the only time I saw his lap when he pulled out his belt to belt me. So that is the way our memories really worked. Miriam, I forgot the question, by the way. What was your question? Would you repeat it, please?
So, you forgave both your mother and your father.
Yeah. Why did I forgive?
And for kind of different reasons.
Well, the fact that my father, there were two things that I had to forgive my father. The fact that he really was very mean to me. Although I know it helped me survive. The second thing, when I asked him to escape to Romania, I don't think that he really could do anything else because he could not work with my understanding. But would he have at least thought through the fact that we were in grave danger and that we had a chance at that time to escape? I think we would have survived, but he didn't do that. With my mother, my father tried to leave Romania in 1935. He and my uncle Aaron went to Palestine to see if they could find food, a job, housing, and what was the conditions there. And they came back both very enthusiastic. My father told my mother that we were going to sell everything and move to Palestine. My mother said, I have a mother who needs me, who suffers from diabetes. I am the only daughter, and I have 4 little girls. What am I going to do in the desert with 4 little children? The oldest one was 5. We were the youngest, were 1. So we stayed. My uncle sold everything. We bought it. And we remained behind. And I don't think that my mother ever really forgave herself as we were being taken to the ghetto and realizing that in part it was her fault that we did not escape.
So one of the things your father gave you was toughness. If I watch the documentary, if I read the book, the toughness of Eva Moses Kor comes through. I think it's very clear from the book that you were the big sister. though you were twins.
No, I was 30 minutes younger. That's what I was
But who's
told.
counting, right?
Yeah, right.
But if not for your toughness, the way I read this is Miriam probably wouldn't have survived,
No,
nor would you.
correct.
And then after the Holocaust, you faced anti-Semitism in communist Romania.
Correct.
Then you go to Israel, and that's a moment of freedom and liberation. You serve in the military.
Correct.
You get married to a Latvian Holocaust survivor, now an American. And then you face swastikas painted on your home in Terre Haute, Indiana at Halloween. You, in more recent years, go to Israel and meet with Palestinians who had enormous grievances and stories of pain. You face tough questions from other Holocaust survivors, upset about your forgiving anyone, even though it's only you and yourself, and in your personal way forgiving them. So what's that toughness all about, which has made you the very best of survivors?
No, that's a pretty good story.
Is some of it true? Of course it is. It's all true. It's a wonderful story.
I am not always exactly sure why I know what is right for me, but maybe I have some guidance from above. Maybe my intuitions are so good. I am never really sure. Particularly the issue with Dr. Munch. Or today I was debating a Holocaust survivor at the Miami Holocaust Memorial. And the truth is that in some way it annoys me, but on the other hand, I feel tremendous pain for the survivors who are still victims 71 years after liberation. And when he said, it gives me, I said, does it really heal you if a Nazi or even though they are old men are hanged? He said, no, that's what I exactly want. That makes me feel good. And I said, doesn't change any of the tragedies that happened? He said, no, but I am glad that they got what they deserved. That mentality, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And I tried to explain to him that really if every Nazi would have been hanged, I still would have been, when we got back from the camp, an 11-year-old orphan. And that they were hanged, that wouldn't have changed it. And I was really more concerned about how to deal with my life than trying to punish all the Nazis. First of all, I don't think it's my job, but it doesn't really make me feel good. And I think that there might be some difference in the way my mother raised us. My mother was always very happy, even though she worked very hard. There was a lot of hardships as the Nazis or the fascists were gaining power, but she always found joy. She took her 4 little girls on a trip with our horse and buggy, and we sang songs, riding in the countryside, and they were so much fun. And even in those days, how she could find that spirit that I believe that in some way I inherited. And so, toughness. I mean, nothing in life is ever easy. Even today, life is the best life that I have had, but now I'm old, so that is the only other problem. Coming to United States, and some of the people here who are actually refugees from Cuba or their families have come from Cuba, to be a refugee, well, I came from Israel, I wasn't really a refugee, but life in the United States, I thought actually that the streets were paved with gold, and you could find trees where you could just pick money off. It never happened. So I didn't speak any English. And I think that fell off. I don't know if I can try to. These modern technology. I think I handled it. Okay. I didn't speak any English. I found out that my husband forgot to change the health insurance from single to family, and he was sitting up nights how he will pay for these babies that's on the way. So I decided to learn English, and within 3 months, I learned English and I got a job.
Tell us how you learned English.
Well, I arrived in the United States in 1960. John F. Kennedy was running for president. And my husband was very excited about John F. Kennedy. And the two things that he was doing with television was watching sports and watching news. Now, in Israel, they did not have a television yet. So I decided I was home. I was expecting, I was pregnant 3-4 weeks, homesick, feeling miserable. I said, okay, I'll turn on television and I'll watch sports or news, whatever it's on. There was a young guy, Bob Hughes, kissing and hugging Lisa Hughes. Interesting. I watched it. And the nice thing about watching television, I didn't have to enter. Of course, the words were coming pretty fast to me in English, but I didn't have to enter. Next day, I did the same thing. We had only one station. And pretty soon I saw this was a pretty long movie. I didn't know much about it. And I wrote down words that I kept hearing phonetically. I couldn't find them in the dictionary, so after about 2 months or 2.5 months, I asked my husband to help me find those words. He looked at me, where on earth did you get these words from? I don't know what I wrote down. So I said to him, I've been watching this movie every day. And he said, you've been watching soap operas? And he was accusing me like I was doing something wrong. I said, no, there was no soap at all in it. So that is the way I learned English.
It was As the World Turns, wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was As the World
Okay.
Turns. Bob and Lisa Hughes.
I think that story would resonate in Miami fully. We're going to try to leave enough time subsequently, so if some people want to get their books signed, Eva's certainly willing to do it, but let's ask some questions from students. So from Andres Garcia, who is in the 8th grade, how did it feel when you finally knew you were free?
I will tell you, one of the first things we really did, we went outside the gate and then came back again. And nobody said halt. And then we went up to the barbed wire fence and we could touch it. And it was no longer with high voltage. It would not electrocute you. The third thing we did, which is very interesting when you are a child, because children take everything the way they hear it. If we heard for almost 3 months, we, the grown-ups and the children, would say someday soon we will be free and we will go home. So I said, now we are free, let's go home. And people looked, where else are you going to go? So these were the things that I realized that most people didn't take it mot a mot or word by word as we did. And so we unfortunately ended up as refugee camps for another 9 months.
From the 9th grade, this is a question from Gabriel Fernandez de Castro. How did the Holocaust influence your faith? Did it strengthen or weaken it, and why?
I don't think it was the Holocaust necessarily. I would say to many people who do not really understand how any of us would cope when we are faced with life and death. Some people in Auschwitz, I have met some, who became more religious. I arrived in Auschwitz a very, very religious little girl. So religious that even after 4 days in the cattle car, that first night when we were given a piece of bread, Miriam and I never even discussed it. We looked at one another and we said, we can't eat that bread because it's not kosher. And the two girls who were showing us around, they were stunned. You do not understand, they said. If you want to survive this place, you better learn to eat everything. Nothing made any sense to me until that night when I saw the little 3 dead children on the latrine floor. It hit me like a ton of brick that actually could happen to Miriam and me unless I did something to prevent it. And this is when at age 10, I could not rationalize what the religion permitted me or what the religion didn't permit me. I just knew one thing, that I was not going to end up on that filthy latrine floor. Now, after the war, I never went back to the religion because that was such a basic survival statement, action that I took that it changed me. But this is the coping mechanism that nobody can decide to do it. And I could not go back to the religion or being religious. I will always be Jewish. I will never convert to any other religion. And I paid too high a price for it, so I might as well use it.
So from the 10th grade, Eva, from Andrew Birch, what advice do you have for people who find forgiving others difficult?
Well, forgiveness, you have to figure out that it's really not for the perpetrator. If you, as a person, are carrying around anger and pain and even thoughts of revenge, which are very sad because ultimately it's not going to solve anything, you have to ask yourself, do I want to be free from this burden that I carry around? Because it is a burden. If you do, because I had some people come to me and said, well, how do you forgive? The same question. I said, but do you think if I write a letter of forgiveness to the person who hurt you, will that help you? He said, that's absurd. I said, you have to write the letter because you forgive. You are taking back your own power over your life. Forgiveness is an act of self-healing, self-liberation, self-empowerment. It's not for the perpetrator. Do not send the letter to the perpetrator because sometimes it has a toxic reaction. But if you realize that you have, that is the only power you have to change what happened. There is nothing else you can do. And if you take that, you will be healed.
Eva, from the 11th grade, Jorge Miro Quesada asked, many years after you went through all that tragedy, looking back, can you name one occasion when you might have had some happiness? And what was the saddest moment?
The happiness was when the bombing started and the Nazis were running like little scaredy cats.
So you've got American planes flying overhead, right?
Yes, and you know, I have argued with people in the public who say there were no Americans. Incorrect. I saw the flag, and 5 years ago I met a pilot who flew over Auschwitz, but it was a top secret United States. He told me, I asked him to sign a statement. He said, Eva, I can't. We have given our oath that we will never publicly divulge it, that we flew and bombed Auschwitz. So therefore, that is a hidden, but if the military would admit, and maybe if there are some people who are really involved with the military, I don't know, nobody will admit to it, but that was great fun. I was never scared of the bombing. Even though we could see the bombs falling, we would applaud. Because what did it mean to us? It meant that the horror would be over and we would be free.
Was there a moment, it's all so sad, was there a moment to further his question that was the saddest?
I think the saddest thing that is still part of the saddest memories that I have is my mother disappeared from our sight. And as it happened, just to share with you a little story, I knew during the years I was growing up that any time I saw a movie where there was a child and a mother and somehow they got separated, I was crying and I knew that it was because of my separation, but I didn't deal with it very closely. And then in 1976, I took my daughter Rena, who is a big movie buff, she wanted to see Kramer versus Kramer, which is a divorce case where it was Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep who were playing, and they were divorced, and the little boy got separated from the mother. And the film ended, and I told my daughter, how did you like your film, your favorite movie stars? Oh, she said, Mom, the film was wonderful, but you were terrible. I said, what did I do? She said, you cried. I have never heard anybody cry like that. And I said to her, didn't you cry? And she said, why should I cry? I said, but the little boy was ripped apart from his mother. So she said, so what? I said, thanks goodness, you don't really understand what it means to be ripped apart from your mother. And for that, I am grateful.
Could a Holocaust happen again? Anthony Trujillo asked that. He's an 8th grader here.
Unfortunately, sadly, it could happen. There are a lot of problems in the world. We are not dealing with them very well. I am not really sure when we are in an election year, how can we help the president? Because the United States does have a unique role to play in keeping the world safe. I used to love President Roosevelt. And then as I got older, I discovered that he didn't do a single thing to stop Adolf Hitler. Well, 11 million people were murdered, 6 million Jews and 5 million non-Jews. The United States was not going to get involved until Pearl Harbor. So I don't know. I don't think that there is another country in the world that can do as much good in fighting evil. And that evil is lurking at our doorsteps. And I am not a politician. I do have opinions, but I am not really sure how we can do it. But doing nothing, it obviously hasn't worked.
In the spirit that this is a school, there's an important new book called 1944, The Year That Changed History.
Really?
And the theme has to do with Auschwitz, and it has to do with the United States. Some of you may know this from reading history, but the State Department was infamously anti-Semitic in the United States.
It was.
And so the questions you're raising here are important ones. And the question was, should we bomb the rail tracks leading to Auschwitz? They were never bombed. Other bombs came close, but we actually did not bomb
Right.
the stopping of the trains. And I think
And that would have helped.
and it's an important book, well worth reading. We think of FDR as one of our best presidents, and he was, but like all of us, flawed, and a non-decision was made, and we need to learn something from you and history, and
Yeah.
you are living history.
Yeah.
So one more question from a student, from an 11th grader named Kevin Baloira. In your book, you're extremely positive and full of hope. Did you ever feel like losing all hope and completely giving up?
Never. Maybe for one day, or not even a day, because in Auschwitz, actually, the tragedy of Auschwitz was that I felt if I was going to give up and not fight for my life, that I would die. And in many ways, that follows me through life. And when I get involved in a project, I have to be convinced that I'm going to succeed, because I cannot quit until it succeeds. So that is one of the things I inherited from Auschwitz. I could never give up on hope. If you give up on hope, you give up. And I was even angry with the children that I saw in the latrine dead. I said I would not give up on life. And I didn't. Now, I am not really sure that I am that unique, but most of the survivors had two things going for them. We needed to have some luck or a guardian angel, or God in some way help us, and a tremendous will to live. And that is what, I think there were over 1 million survivors who survived. So there was a lot of that, even though I have never, I have done a project for my college class. I interviewed 68 Holocaust survivors and asked them a lot of questions regarding, did they have hope? Did they ever give up? And only one single person among the 68 was sorry that they survived. And that case was because she was going through a very nasty divorce, and she really was very unhappy in her life. But most of the survivors were very glad that they made it in spite of it. And most of the survivors, what I found amazing, and it is a fact, that they want to help other people and try to be involved in some way in helping children or humanity. And that is amazing, even though they survived atrocities.
I don't want the evening to end, and we're going to do something after we finish this, and Mr. De Quesada is going to come up and lead us in that, but...
Or in a dance?
What?
Or going to dance?
No one knows this yet. Now you spoil a surprise. But Eva Kor founded a museum in Terre Haute, Indiana called Candles, with a particular emphasis on the twins, of which I think she has located maybe 122.
Correct.
Of the total of 3,000 twins, 1,500 sets of twins. And just to add pain to all of this, the museum was up and running and people were visiting and she was telling the story and so forth. And arson hit the museum. And it was destroyed. And it was rebuilt bigger and significantly better than ever. But I'd like folks to know about this museum and what you're doing there.
First of all, I opened the museum as a way of coping with the pain of the death of Miriam. And her spirit is there. But when the flames were shooting through the roof, reporters are wonderful. They have a way of putting a microphone in front of you and say, well, so how do you feel? So I said, well, I have had better days, but then I fast remembered that, of course, I have had worse days. And then they said, so what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to rebuild it. I am going to use the last penny in my pocket. As it turned out, I didn't need to do that, because as people heard about it, I can tell you the communities in Indiana, Vigo County, and all the nearby communities, schools, were doing penny war. I don't know what that exactly is, but some of you might. And I was invited to different classrooms, and I was going to a first grade class. Oh, are they wonderful, adorable little kids. And there was one in the front, and they raised $1,000 for the school. And I said to this little cute girl, so what do you know about the Holocaust? She said, well, I know when you were my age, people called you dirty Jew, and that was very unfair. And we should never call anybody names. I thought to myself, if we can teach little children at age 6, we don't have to worry about the grown-ups. Now, the museum has grown. The idea of removing hatred and prejudice, that we all have to work with that to remove it from our lives, is continuing. On our marquee, I have the following words. Let us remove all hatred and prejudice from this world, and let it begin with me. The other says, Tikkun Olam, which is in Hebrew means repair the world, celebrate life, forgive and heal. And we have many projects right now are working. We have a youth board from junior high and high school who come up with their own projects, and also are going to sponsor a couple of high school students to go to Auschwitz. And we are working on a hologram. I don't know, I think it is not nice to use usually schwitz or tell stories about yourself that you accomplished. But what happened was I was chosen as one of 12 Holocaust survivors, and I don't really know why, but I am glad I was, to be used as a hologram, which means that I will be sitting for 30 hours in a little cube with a lot of lights and cameras on me, and they will ask a lot of questions. That was already, we were given a grant by Eli Lilly for $500,000. Now we could have a hologram theater, because those holograms of the 12 survivors will be available at those theaters for, looks like eternity or whatever that means. But we would have an opportunity to create a hologram theater in Terre Haute, Indiana, and we would also like to create a peace and forgiveness garden, because forgiveness is what I deal with. And suddenly I am involved in a bigger project. I just wanted a little museum. Now it becomes a big museum. So I guess if we don't grow, we are standing still or we are going backward. And the appeal that we could influence more and more people, at least to think, learn, and try to heal themselves, that is really challenging, but it's also very rewarding. So that is what we are working on, and this is one of the reasons that got me here, because you're very nice, a neighbor and community leader, Mike Fernandez and his wife, Constance, yes. Constance, she's a beautiful lady, and she has a beautiful name, invited me, and so we are hoping to help that. But the first thing we are doing right now, we are getting ready for the trip to Auschwitz. And Mike, have you visited Auschwitz? Okay, yeah. It is a unique place. There are a lot of lessons. What I hope when I take groups to Auschwitz, I want the teachers, I want the students to experience it. So when they teach it in the classroom, it's not an abstract thing. They can say, how does it feel to see those barracks, to stand on the selection platform, to go into the gas chamber, to walk that vast ground of killing fields. And I think that many of them have really taken that to heart and carrying it with them. So that is what we are working on. I also would like to have time this year to write another book, but I said every Monday I will dedicate it to writing a book this year. I flunked the test today.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from someone all of us will remember all our lives. Thank you. You've blessed us. We're blessed to hear you. Ladies and gentlemen, Eva Mozes Kor.
Thank you. You have been a unique, outstanding, caring, and loving audience. And I thank you very much.
You were a big hit. Now, wait 1 second. Something else is going to happen.
At this
Okay.
time, I'd like to invite our Student Council President, Mr. Daniel Dagger, and our Student Council Vice President, Mr. Nicholas Tootle, to make a special presentation.
On behalf of the Belen Jesuit student body, we would like to present Mrs. Kor with 2 gifts. One of them is a box containing letters written by Belen students who read your book and wanted to thank you for providing them with such a moving and powerful story. And the second one is a goodie bag filled with Belen gifts for you to enjoy.
Goodie bags, wonderful. Wow. Yes. So thank you very much. Very sweet and very thoughtful. I will, on the way back to Indiana, I can read all those letters, right?
Okay, so at this time, can everyone please join together and sing a happy early birthday to Miss Kor?
Wow. That is beautiful. I'm going to stand here. Wow. I have never seen a more beautiful cake.
She was sensational.
I am
By the way we handled it.
speechless, and that is unusual for me. Thank you. It's beautiful, thoughtful, and you really touch my heart. And next year I'm coming back for the next birthday. Thank you. So can we pass out the cake, or what are we going to do?
Before we end our program, We'll be taking some photos here up on stage, but if anyone has a copy of her book and would like her to sign the book, we're going to form a line alongside the left-hand side of the theater,
I need my pen.
and she will be signing books after we take photos. We thank the Belen community for coming out and supporting this very special
Where is
event.
my walker? I have my achievement.
We thank the Fernandez family once again for helping to make this happen. We thank all of our honored guests, Mr. David Lawrence, and last but not least, Mrs. Kor, thank you for your incredible story. I think Mr. Lawrence put it best when he said there's a toughness about you. Thank you for sharing all of these experiences with this great group of people
I
tonight.
want my walker.
Thank you.
Walker. Thank you.